Hey guys, it's Mark from Hallmark Pool Supplies, and in this video we're going to talk about how to service and repair your multiport valve on a Pentair filter. This valve is a 262506, and Pentair does make several variations of this valve. The big difference is how they mount to the tank itself, but as far as the valve itself and all the parts and the servicing, that's pretty much the same. Pentair does make a lot of other valves as well, but in this video we're going to be dealing with the 262506 valve that does fit all of your sand dollar filters as well as all your TA or tangless top mount filters. And so at this point in time, let's jump in. So how do we know if we need to service or repair the valve? Well, first of all, your valve should have good compression. It should be nice and tight, have good spring. We should also be able to rotate the valve nice and smooth. And if the valve doesn't have compression and it is hard to turn, or maybe the valve is leaking, these are signs that let us know that we need to service the valve. Now, in a lot of cases, people will remove the screws. We've got 6 screws here. They'll take the assembly out and they'll just drop in a new assembly, put the screws in, and we're done. A lot of times we can lube a valve or maybe replace an O-ring, and it is a quick fix, and it will be a lot cheaper to do this than to replace the whole assembly. So I'm going to show you how we take it apart. And the first thing we want to do is we want to turn off the pump. Once the pump is turned off, we want to unscrew the air relief valve, let all the air out. And then we're going to remove the handle. This will be the first thing we need to do, and it is in the filter position, so take note because there's going to be a few things I'm going to explain why we have to do this a certain way, but we are going to have it in the filter position. And if you'll take note, there's a little weep hole here, and inside that weep hole there's a screw that goes through the diverter into the handle. And we're going to stick our screwdriver in here, and we're actually going to unscrew the screw. Now, once we've removed the screw, we can remove the handle. Remember, we have this pointing in the filter position. So we're going to remove that, and we'll set this to the side. We do have a spacer up here on top. We're going to take that off and set that to the side as well. And now what we're going to do is we're going to get a 5/16 nut driver, and we're going to just loosen the screws all the way around so that the top comes off evenly. We do have a nut. We actually have the screw itself with the washer, and we're going to remove every one of them. All right, so now that we've got all the screws, nuts, and washers off, we'll set that to the side, and now we're going to be able to take off the top. We're going to take it off just like this, and this is something important to note. When we remove this, if you look right here, there is a notch. And you'll see that there's a notch right here. This is very important for later because we're going to have to line this up. So we're taking this off, and as we take this off, this is the actual top. There is an O-ring here, and this O-ring is usually okay. If it's leaking or damaged or bad, you can replace it. But at the same time, while we're servicing the valve, we can also lube this. That protects the O-ring, adds life to it, and at the same time, makes it easier when we go to put it back together. Now, when we look at the diverter here on top, we have an O-ring, and this O-ring is sitting in place, and sometimes it's stuck here, but this is actually where it goes. And of course our shaft goes through here, and that O-ring there is what prevents water from leaking through the top. So if you guys have a leak up here, more than likely it's this O-ring, and that can be replaced if it's not damaged. We also want to lube that. That keeps that in good keeping, so we're going to set that to the side, and then we've got another spacer we're going to remove, and then we have the actual spring, and we want to make sure that the spring has good compression. This one is good. It's not rusted, it's not damaged. We can barely close it in our hands because it is very tight, and that's what we want. We're going to set our spring to the side, and then we have our diverter. Now, the diverter, because it was pointing in the filter position, is set just as such. And if we look down here when we take this off, you're going to see there's a window there. And the window is quite large, but this window is going to be on this side of the window, and this bracket or frame on the diverter is going to be in line with the pressure gauge. These are just little things to take note of, but I'm going to show you as we put this back together. As we remove this, this is the actual diverter. If we have a problem with water leaking out of the backwash, well, that might pertain to this gasket here, which is actually factory molded onto the diverter, and you cannot replace this gasket. This is a gasket that if it wears or goes out, we have to replace the whole entire diverter. Let's step over here. I've taken the time to lay out all the parts for this valve. And like I said before, this is the 262-506 valve. It also works with the 504 and the 505. It is a very common valve that they make, and I have all the parts here. I will put links in the description down below that goes to my website for all of these parts if you need any of this. We do have it, and for any of you guys that are buying from me on my website, you are directly supporting this channel, and I do thank you for that. But let's start here. We have a handle. Then we have the pin for the handle. We also have a label. If your label gets wore out, you can replace just the label. I also have the screws, the nuts, and the washers. We also have the spacers, and the spacers are sold as a set. They come as two. We also have the diverter. Like I said, the gasket is already molded to that. We also have the O-ring that goes on the diverter or underneath the top of the cap. I have the actual top of the valve. I also have the O-ring that goes on top of the valve. We also have the spring. We also have the whole entire valve. And we have also the high flow valve assembly itself for those of you that want to drop and go. If you get this, there is no O-ring here, but you would use your O-ring that you already have. And if you need it, we've got that as well. I also have the O-ring that goes under the valve that is going to be where it sits on top of the filter. I also have the brackets along with the hardware to clamp the valve on if you guys need that. And then we also have the lube, and the lube is a silicone-based lube. I know a lot of people say, oh, I'm just going to get Vaseline and lube up my O-rings. It is best to use a silicone-based lubricant. It is going to protect the O-ring and add life, and does make it easier for wear, and also makes it easier to put everything back together. And you really don't want to use Vaseline. It is a petroleum-based lubricant, and it's not good for the rubber. I also have the pressure gauge. We also have the air relief valve with O-ring. And last but not least, I do have the sight glass, and I also have the washer for the sight glass. So this way, I have everything laid out for those of you that need it. Like I said, I will post links in the description down below. But at this time, let's go ahead and put this valve back together. So if we've already inspected, repaired, or replaced the diverter, in this case, we're good. We can go ahead and put it back in. Like I said, we're going to be lubricating O-rings and so forth to make this operate more smoothly. We don't need to lube the gasket on the bottom of the diverter. So as we get ready to put the diverter in, like I said, we want to set it in place. And this edge of the frame here will be on this side of the window, and this bracket or frame is going to be in line with the pressure gauge. And that way it just gives us a reference so we know how to put that in there and we get it lined up properly. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab our spring that we've already checked. And if you needed to replace it or what have you, you can. But this one is good. We're going to put that one on. We're going to come in here and we're going to put our spacer on top. And then remember, we have the O-ring. When I took it off, it was actually on the shaft, but here it's underneath the top of the valve itself. And we'll be able to now put this in. And when we put it on, we want to make sure that we line up the notch right there with the notch on the bottom. So this way, when we screw it down, we're not having this valve turned in different directions. It's going to be lined up exactly the way we want it. So the next thing we need to do is we need to grab all of our screws, our nuts, and our washers. And we want to make sure that we put all our screws in. So now that we have all our screws, we've got our top lined up, we're going to put our first screw and nut on, and we're going to push down. And what we're going to do is we're just going to get it started. Not going to tighten it, just get it started. And then we want to come over here and do the same thing with the one directly across. And the reason we're doing it this way is it's going to allow that valve to draw in evenly. And now we can then proceed with the rest of them and snugging them up. Okay, so now that we have all our screws on and they're nice and snug, now we can go and tighten them. And what I like to do is when we're putting them on, just like when we're tightening them, we're going to go back and forth across from one another. This just draws this in evenly. Once we get everything good and tight, then we can just kind of go around and snug everything. Our notch is lined up. We're sitting exactly where we want. And now we're going to get the spacer. And we're going to put this on. And by the way, we can even take some lube. And we can even put lube in here and around the shaft. And drop this in. Just allows that to wear better and rotate much smoother. And then we're going to get our handle, and we're going to put our handle on. And remember, we are in the filter position, and then the screw goes through the little weep hole so we can tighten it. Now, some of you guys might say, well, what happens if we put the handle on this way? Well, this is kind of idiot proof because we can't go through the weep hole now because there's no hole or notch in the handle. It's on this side. And if you take a look over here, we're not able to do that because there's nowhere to put a screwdriver to get the screw in. So it can only go this way. So they made it that way so that this way you don't accidentally put it in incorrectly. So we get the screw in. Okay, so now we've got that nice and snug. She's in. We can push this down. We've got good compression. Rotates nice and smooth. Lock it back into place. And we're pretty much done. What we want to do next is go ahead and turn the pump on. We want to go ahead and get it primed, get the system running, and as the system is filling with water, we have the air relief valve still open because we released it earlier. And what we want to do is just wait till we start seeing water shooting out. And once we do, we now know the tank is full. Then we can go ahead and close this. And at this time, we're already in filter. And what we want to do next is walk around and inspect everything and make sure that everything is good and tight, make sure there's no leaks. And if it is, then we're good to go. So hopefully this video was helpful. And as a reminder, I do have all the parts to this valve linked in the description below that goes straight to my website for those of you that need it. And if any of you guys run into any problems or difficult pool related issues, check out my Patreon page, where as a patron you can not only book phone sessions with me, I can even do virtual service calls. And if you are new to the channel, hit that like and subscribe button for future content. I definitely want to thank everybody for watching. I want to thank all my subscribers as well as my patrons, because without you guys, this channel wouldn't exist, and I do thank you for that. Remember us at Hallmark Pool Supplies for all your pool needs. My name is Mark, and I'll see you guys on the next video.